At 6:12 on a cold Chicago morning, Emily Carter stared at her phone and realized no one was coming. In less than 2 hours, doctors would wheel her into surgery, place her under bright lights, and put her to sleep. Yet the part that scared her most wasn't the operation, it was the thought of her 3-month-old twins waking up without her there. Ava and Noah slept in the hospital nursery down the hall. Unaware that their mother's careful plan had collapsed overnight, Emily had always been the type to plan ahead. She was 32, a first-time mother, and already exhausted in ways she never imagined before becoming a parent. Complications after childbirth had left her weak and in constant pain. Her doctor had been clear: the surgery could not wait. If she delayed it, the risks would grow and recovery would become harder. Emily accepted the medical facts. What she wasn't prepared for was how alone she would feel facing them. The plan was simple. Her parents, Linda and Robert Carter, would stay with the twins for 2 days while Emily recovered in the hospital. They lived less than an hour away, enjoyed good health, and often talked about how busy their social calendar was. Emily believed that when it truly mattered, they would show up. She had grown up believing family always came first. The night before surgery, she called them again, hoping for reassurance. Instead, the conversation went quiet and uncomfortable. Her mother spoke with tired patience, saying they were not as young as they used to be. Her father added that caring for twins would be overwhelming. Then came the sentence Emily would never forget. He said they loved her, but her situation had become too much to handle. A burden. They mentioned their plans right after. Concert downtown. Tickets they had waited months for. Excitement filled their voices as they discussed parking and dinner afterward. Emily listened in silence, holding her phone with shaking hands, realizing she was no longer part of the conversation. When the call ended, she sat alone in her kitchen, surrounded by baby bottles and folded blankets, feeling smaller than she ever had before. Now, in the hospital room, that memory replayed in her mind. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant. Machines hummed softly. Outside the window, the city slowly woke up. Emily pressed her fingers together, trying to steady her breathing. She wasn't angry yet. She was hurt in a quiet, heavy way that made her chest feel tight. A nurse entered to check her vitals and offered a warm smile. "You're doing great," she said kindly, as if sensing Emily's fear. Emily nodded, but her eyes drifted toward the hallway where the nursery was located. She wondered how many mothers before her had sat in this same spot, wondering who would be there when they needed help the most. Emily's life hadn't always looked like this. Just a year earlier, she had imagined a very different future. She had been married then, hopeful and excited about becoming a mother. The pregnancy was planned, celebrated, and shared with joy. But somewhere between doctor visits and nursery planning, her marriage began to change. Conversations became short. Smiles became rare. By the time the twins were born, the love they once shared had quietly faded. The separation wasn't dramatic. There were no shouting matches or public scenes. It's just two people admitting they were no longer on the same path. Her ex-husband moved out of state for work. He sent support and checked in occasionally, but he wasn't there for the late night feedings or the endless worries that came with caring for 2 newborns. Emily told herself she could handle it. She had always been strong. Strength, she learned, didn't mean never needing help. The nurse returned and gently explained that hospital policy required the babies to stay in the nursery. During the surgery and recovery period, Emily swallowed hard and nodded. When the bassinets were wheeled past her door, she felt a sudden rush of panic. She reached out, touching Ava's tiny hand for one last moment. Noah stirred but didn't wake. Emily whispered promises they couldn't hear, telling them she would be back soon. Once the door closed, the room felt painfully empty. Emily lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling. She thought about her parents, probably getting ready for their night out, choosing outfits and discussing the set list. The contrast felt sharp and unreal. Part of her wanted to call them again, to beg, to remind them she was still their daughter. But another part of her felt tired of asking for something that should have been freely given. As the minutes passed, fear slowly turned into resolve. Emily realized she had crossed an invisible line. She could no longer depend on people simply because they were family. That truth hurt, but it also brought clarity. If she wanted stability for her children, she would have to build it herself, piece by piece, with or without her parents' support. A doctor entered to explain the procedure once more. Emily listened carefully, asking practical questions, forcing herself to focus. She signed consent forms with steady hands. Each signature felt like a quiet promise to herself and to her children that she would get through this. When the time came, orderlies arrived to take her to surgery. As they began to wheel her bed down the hallway, Emily caught one last glimpse of the nursery doors. Her heart ached, but she held on to a single thought. This surgery was for them, for a future where she could lift them without pain, hold them longer, and be fully present as their mother. Bright lights filled the operating room. The anesthesiologist spoke calmly, explaining each step. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle over her. Just before she drifted off, a quiet realization settled in her mind. This moment, this loneliness, was changing her. It was teaching her something painful, but necessary. She wasn't a burden. She was a woman facing one of the hardest days of her life alone. And somehow, even in that silence, she felt the beginning of something new. Emily woke slowly, the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room fading into her blurred vision. Pain radiated from her abdomen, dull and persistent. But the first thing she felt wasn't physical light, was emptiness. She had survived surgery, but there was no one waiting for her. No flowers, no calls, not even a familiar voice. The quiet was heavier than any pain medication. Her parents had promised help, and yet here she was, alone, recovering while the world outside moved on. The nurse noticed her eyes and offered a small, understanding smile. "You're awake. The twins are fine. They're in the nursery if you want to see them soon." Emily nodded, her throat tight. "Fine," she whispered, though her heart felt anything but. She had imagined waking from surgery and seeing her parents by her side, offering comfort, even a simple hand to hold. Instead, she faced sterile walls and a quiet room, realizing just how little support she could rely on. When the nurse wheeled her to see Ava and Noah, Emily's chest ached in a new way. They were tiny, bundled in soft blankets, their faces scrunched in sleep. The moment she reached out, her fingers brushed the soft skin of Ava's hand and Noah stirred slightly, their innocence untouched by human failings. Emily felt a rush of protective instinct, stronger than any fear or anger. She kissed their foreheads gently, whispering promises she couldn't quite say out loud, that she would always be there, that she would grow stronger, and that no absence, no matter how painful, would define their bond. In the days that followed, Emily faced the harsh truth of her parents' choices. A single phone call arrived from them, brief and lighthearted, recounting the amazing concert they had attended. There was no apology, no inquiry about the twins, nothing that showed they understood the gravity of what Emily had endured. At first, anger bubbled within her, sharp and hot. She wanted to scream, to demand they see the consequences of their absence, to make them feel a fraction of the isolation she had felt. But the anger soon drained away, leaving a quiet clarity. Emily realized that waiting for family to come through, especially when they had proven themselves unreliable, was a trap she could no longer fall into. She could no longer expect love and care simply because of shared blood. Strength, she understood now, was about making choices, protecting the people she loved, and building a support system that was real, dependable, and present. Help arrived in unexpected forms. Claire, a neighbor she barely knew, offered to watch the twins in the evenings, allowing Emily to rest without worry. Meals arrived from coworkers, each carefully prepared with notes of encouragement. The pediatrician, sensing her stress and exhaustion, personally checked in multiple times, offering guidance and reassurance. Slowly, Emily discovered that family could be chosen, not just given. And that kindness often came from those who had no obligation to give it. Among these quiet sources of support, Daniel arrived. He was assigned as her physical therapist, a calm presence with a patient demeanor and a gentle way of encouraging progress without judgment. At first, Emily kept her guard up, wary of trusting anyone too deeply. But Daniel's sincerity was unmistakable. Each session, he guided her through her exercises, praised small victories, and acknowledged the difficulties she faced, treating her with respect and care. One afternoon, as Emily winced through a particularly painful stretch, he spoke softly, almost casually. "You're allowed to need help. That doesn't make you weak." The words struck her like a lifeline. So often she had felt guilty for needing support, for feeling vulnerable, for admitting that the weight of being a single mother was heavy. Daniel's words were simple, but they carried a truth she had been too proud or too afraid to acknowledge. She realized that being strong didn't mean enduring everything alone. It meant recognizing when to accept help and trusting others to give it. Time passed, measured in small victories. A feed without tears. A walk around the hospital garden. A night where both twins slept for more than a few hours. With each passing day, Emily regained pieces of herself she thought were lost. She rebuilt not only her physical strength, but her emotional resilience. She learned to navigate motherhood with confidence, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope. When her parents eventually called again, asking why she seemed distant and quiet, Emily didn't respond with anger. She simply said, "I needed you, and you weren't there." There was silence on the other end, a pause that carried more weight than any argument could have. But instead of feeling broken, Emily felt free. She had reached a point where their approval or presence no longer determined her sense of worth. She was defining herself, her life, and her family by the people who chose to stay. Emily's days slowly settled into a rhythm of quiet joy. Afternoons with the twins became moments of discovery, watching Ava's tiny fingers grasp Noah's first attempts at laughter, the way they both reacted to the sound of her voice. She learned to find beauty in the small, ordinary moments. In the way sunlight fell across their crib, or the peacefulness of a shared nap. Each moment was a reminder that her strength and love were enough, and that the absence of her parents did not diminish her or her children. Months passed and Emily's home transformed into a sanctuary. Friends and neighbors who had stepped in continued to provide support, forming a chosen family that made her feel valued and seen. Daniel remained a quiet presence, offering guidance and support without expectation. Gradually, their connection deepened, though carefully and naturally built on trust and mutual respect. Emily learned to open her heart again, recognizing that love could be patient, gentle, and present in unexpected forms. One evening, as Emily watched Ava and Noah sleep peacefully side by side, she reflected on the journey she had endured. Pain, abandonment, and disappointment had tested her in ways she never imagined. Yet each challenge had revealed her resilience. She no longer saw herself as weak or vulnerable. She saw herself as a mother who could face hardships, accept help, and still provide unwavering love. Her children were thriving, her life was moving forward. And she had discovered that family was not only who was born into her life, but who chose to stand by her side. Emily smiled quietly, a sense of peace washing over her. She was no longer a burden. She was a mother, a survivor, and someone capable of creating a life filled with care, love, and chosen connections. The trauma of being abandoned by her parents during her most vulnerable moment had shaped her, but it did not define her. She had learned to trust, to heal, and to find love in places she had never expected. In the calm of her living room, the soft sounds of her twins breathing evenly, Emily allowed herself to imagine a future filled with possibilities. A life where people showed up not because they were obligated, but because they wanted to. A life where love was measured in actions, not just words. And in that quiet moment, she realized she was finally living a chapter of her life written on her own terms. Strong, resilient, and ready for whatever came next. The journey had begun with betrayal and loneliness, but it ended with clarity and hope. Emily had faced the hardest days alone and emerged, not broken, but empowered. She had learned that family could be chosen, that love could arrive unexpectedly, and that her worth was never defined by those who failed to show up. As she tucked her children into their cribs and whispered promises of a better tomorrow, she knew one truth. The strongest bonds are forged not by obligation, but by presence, care, and unwavering choice. And in that realization, Emily found peace and a quiet anticipation for the life she was about to build.